Why do the most intelligent people often feel the most alone? Have you ever walked into a crowded room, smiled politely, made small talk, and still felt completely out of place? Have you ever wondered why, despite your intelligence, curiosity, and ability to understand complex ideas, you find social gatherings draining, even meaningless? If that resonates with you, you're not alone. In fact, you might be part of a rare category of individuals, those whose minds are simply too deep for surface-level interactions. People who, like Schopenhauer once suggested, don't just avoid social life, they transcend it. Let me ask you something even more unsettling. What if your aversion to social life isn't a flaw, but a sign of brilliance? What if solitude, something society often associates with loneliness, awkwardness, or even failure, is actually a sacred space where your most authentic self is allowed to breathe? There's a reason why history's greatest minds, Nikola Tesla, Isaac Newton, Emily Dickinson, chose silence over socializing. It wasn't arrogance, it wasn't fear, it was because they saw the world differently. They felt more at home in their thoughts than in noisy conversations filled with gossip and social games. And maybe, just maybe, you do too. But here's the tragic twist. Society doesn't celebrate this kind of mind. It labels it, misunderstands it, sometimes even shames it. You're told to come out of your shell, network more, and stop overthinking. But what if your so-called shell is actually your sanctuary? In this video, we're going to explore a radical idea posed by philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer, an idea that will challenge everything you've been told about intelligence, isolation, and the so-called necessity of social life. Because once you see what he saw, you may never crave the crowd again. The solitary genius. Why Schopenhauer and others like him chose to be alone. Arthur Schopenhauer was not a man known for his charm. He didn't make small talk. He didn't attend salons. He wasn't concerned with dinner invitations, reputations, or building a network of social allies. While others mingled, performed, and competed for attention, he retreated to silence, to solitude, and most importantly, to thought. But Schopenhauer wasn't merely avoiding people. He was avoiding what they represented: distraction, superficiality, conformity. In his eyes, society was not a space of meaningful exchange. It was a theater of the absurd, a place where people wore masks so tightly they forgot their own faces, where conversations rarely scratched beneath the surface, and were more about maintaining appearances than sharing truths. In such a world, solitude wasn't an escape, it was a necessity. He wrote, "Solitude is the fate of all exceptional spirits." But he wasn't bitter about it. He saw it as a natural consequence of intellectual clarity. When your thoughts roam far beyond the trivial concerns of the masses' status, gossip, shallow ambitions, then ordinary interaction begins to feel like a slow suffocation. Schopenhauer understood that the price of insight was isolation, and he was far from the only one. Nikola Tesla, perhaps one of the most visionary inventors the world has ever known, famously said, "The mind is sharper and keener in seclusion and uninterrupted solitude." Tesla was not antisocial by nature, but he fiercely protected his inner world. He found that the noise of social life blurred the sharpness of his ideas. The more he immersed himself in solitude, the more he could hear the deeper, subtler frequencies of thought. It's no coincidence that some of his most groundbreaking innovations came during the loneliest periods of his life. Then there was Emily Dickinson. Reclusive, intense, mysterious, she lived most of her adult life inside her family home, often refusing visitors and writing in the quiet hours of the morning. Her isolation wasn't rooted in fear of people, but in reverence for stillness. Through silence, she touched dimensions of language and meaning that most people only glimpse in dreams. Isaac Newton, one of the founding fathers of modern science, wasn't known for warmth or sociability. During the Great Plague of London, while most were in panic, Newton isolated himself in the countryside. It was during this period, his Year of Wonders, that he formulated the foundations of calculus, optics, and the laws of motion. Genius for him required silence. Even Albert Einstein, a man often described as charming in public, privately confessed his preference for solitude. "I am truly a lone traveler, and have never belonged to my country, my home, my friends, or even my immediate family," he wrote. Einstein knew that his thoughts flowed more freely when the world wasn't looking. What unites these figures? Each of them found in solitude not suffering, but structure, not emptiness, but essence. They weren't rejecting people because they couldn't connect. They were rejecting what people so often connect over: distractions, posturing, performance. The illusion of intimacy wrapped in polite conversation. The shallowness of a world too afraid to be quiet. Schopenhauer argued that most people fear silence because in it they are confronted by themselves. But those who truly think, who truly seek, do not fear the quiet. They require it. In the absence of noise, they can finally hear what matters. Yet this path is not easy. It's misunderstood, often painfully so. Society rewards extroversion. It praises the networker, the social butterfly, the charismatic voice in the room. The quiet ones, the thinkers, the observers, the questioners are often dismissed as awkward, strange, even broken. Their refusal to play the social game is treated as a flaw rather than a form of integrity. But as Schopenhauer saw it, social rejection is often just another word for existential clarity. It's not that the solitary mind is incapable of connection. It's that it demands a deeper kind of connection, one that isn't built on small talk, but on shared truth. And such truth is rare in a world that thrives on illusion. So those who see through the illusion must learn to walk alone, not because they want to, but because there is no other way to preserve the clarity of their vision. This is the tragic beauty of the solitary genius. They are exiled not by force, but by insight, banished not by society's cruelty, but by its shallowness. And yet, in that exile, something extraordinary is born. Schopenhauer's truth. Why the brilliant mind must walk alone. Solitude, Schopenhauer wrote, is the fate of all exceptional minds. Not a curse, not an unfortunate side effect of brilliance, but a fate, a natural law of the intellectual world. For Schopenhauer, the more intelligent a person is, the more they are bound to feel out of place in ordinary human society. Not because they think they are better, not because they lack empathy or warmth, but because the average rhythms of social life are misaligned with the inner tempo of a thinking mind. Imagine trying to discuss the structure of the cosmos in a room full of people obsessed with celebrity gossip. Imagine bringing a telescope to a masquerade ball. That is what everyday interaction often feels like to those with exceptional minds, like trying to speak in frequencies others aren't tuned into. And when your ideas, values, and questions reach a depth that most people have no desire or ability to explore, a kind of psychic exhaustion begins to set in. You learn over time that it's easier to say nothing, to be polite, to nod, to disappear. But in that silence, something dangerous grows, the sense of disconnection. Schopenhauer believed this disconnection was not a psychological failure, but a philosophical inevitability. He saw society not as a space of authentic exchange, but as a theater A carefully constructed performance where most people act out roles designed to win approval, status, or advantage. The goal is not to be true but to be accepted, not to express but to impress. In his most famous work, The World as Will and Representation, Schopenhauer described life itself as a projection of inner desires, a theater of illusions crafted by a blind, irrational force he called the will. According to him, most people are slaves to this will. Their conversations, ambitions, relationships, even their morals are not rooted in truth, but in the unconscious drive to satisfy cravings for recognition, power, pleasure, control. So when the exceptional mind enters this space seeking honesty, depth, clarity, it finds only distraction, a performance. And what happens to a person who no longer wants to act? They leave the stage. This is what solitude is in Schopenhauer's philosophy, not escapism, but rebellion. A conscious refusal to participate in a system built on illusion. He didn't believe that the intelligent should try to isolate themselves. He believed they would be forced to, not by society's cruelty, but by its incompatibility. And it gets deeper. Schopenhauer argued that social life not only fails to fulfill the thinking mind, it actively corrupts it. He believed that spending too much time among people led to a kind of intellectual contamination. You start to absorb their concerns, adopt their language, and mimic their anxieties. The crowd doesn't just distract you, it shapes you, softens you, bends your mind to fit the mold. He wrote, "A man can be himself only so long as he is alone, and if he does not love solitude, he will not love freedom, for it is only when he is alone that he is really free." This statement is radical in its implications. It means that even the most well-meaning social interaction can become a kind of cage, that freedom isn't found in self-expression, but in self-containment, and that the highest form of independence is not political or financial, but psychological. To be free, in Schopenhauer's terms, is to be free from the expectations of the crowd. And here's the irony. The more intelligent you are, the more sensitive you become to those expectations. You hear the subtext in conversations. You notice the performance. You sense the masks people wear, and worse, the way they expect you to wear one too. This is why, according to Schopenhauer, the social world becomes unbearable for brilliant minds, not because it's hostile, but because it's hollow. The small talk, the flattery, the veiled competitiveness, the rituals of politeness ask you to edit yourself for the comfort of others. These things don't just feel tedious, they feel violent to the soul. And yet, there's no villain here. Society is not evil. It's simply structured for the median, not the exceptional. It rewards agreement, not divergence, familiarity, not insight. The role of society is to maintain cohesion, not to foster genius. This is why Schopenhauer saw solitude as essential, not optional, essential. Because without it, the exceptional mind is drowned in noise, compromised, weakened. Solitude is the only space left where thought can remain unfiltered, where the thinker can truly be. So if you too have felt this quiet discomfort in social settings, this subtle alienation, you are not broken. You are not failing. You are simply seeing too much, feeling too much, thinking too deeply in a world that prefers simplicity. And for Schopenhauer, that was not a tragedy. It was a kind of liberation. Beyond Schopenhauer, when solitude becomes the philosopher's sanctuary, Arthur Schopenhauer was not the only great thinker to look upon society with skepticism. In fact, many of the world's most influential minds spanning centuries and civilizations have reached similar conclusions. that solitude is not just a condition of the thinker, but often the requirement for truth. Take Friedrich Nietzsche, for instance. A fiery spirit, unafraid of contradiction, Nietzsche offered one of the most haunting observations on this topic. In the crowd, the free spirit drowns. To Nietzsche, the masses were not evil, but they were dangerous to the individual soul. The crowd, by its nature, suppresses difference. It molds, it corrects. It forces the unique mind to flatten its edges in order to fit into a box that was never made for it. In solitude, the free spirit breathes. In society, it suffocates. Nietzsche himself lived in self-imposed isolation for much of his life, wandering through the Alps, writing by candlelight, wrestling with ideas too uncomfortable for polite conversation. He saw solitude not as retreat but as resistance, a sacred rebellion against mediocrity, mass opinion, and moral herd thinking. Then there's Voltaire, the Enlightenment wit whose sarcasm masked piercing insight. He famously said, "The secret to being boring is to tell everything you know." At first glance, it's a clever remark. But dig deeper, and it points to a profound frustration, that most conversations do not welcome depth. They punish it. Try to speak honestly, insightfully, or vulnerably in the wrong setting, and you'll often be met with glazed eyes, nervous laughter, or quick attempts to change the subject. For Voltaire, as for many intellectuals, social life wasn't merely dull, it was a space where truth had to be diluted to remain palatable. This is why the intelligent often speak less, not because they have less to say, but because they know how little of it will be understood. In a world allergic to nuance, silence becomes a form of integrity. The East offers its own version of this wisdom. In Buddhism, solitude is not seen as loneliness, it is a state of liberation. The Buddha himself left his palace, his family, and the life of worldly pleasure to sit alone beneath a tree and confront the suffering of existence. His enlightenment came not from social engagement, but from withdrawal. One of Buddhism's core teachings is that attachment to the external possessions, people, praise, is the root of suffering. And what is social life, if not a tapestry of attachments? The desire to be liked, to be approved of, to belong. These cravings bind the soul to illusion. True freedom, the Buddha taught, begins with letting go. In this way, Schopenhauer, who was deeply influenced by Buddhist philosophy, saw solitude as more than just a philosophical preference. It was a path to awakening, a way to escape the endless cycle of desire, comparison, and distraction that defines ordinary human life. But solitude, if misunderstood, can turn bitter, which is where Stoicism enters the picture. The Stoics, particularly Marcus Aurelius and Epictetus, didn't advocate cutting oneself off from society. Instead, they taught the art of emotional detachment within society. They knew that isolation could become alienation if it lacked purpose. So instead of fleeing from people, they advised something more nuanced: to engage with the world, but without letting it possess your inner world. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Give yourself a gift, the present moment. Be indifferent to what does not lie within your control." In this light, solitude is not just physical distance, it is mental sovereignty. It's the ability to walk among others without becoming one of them, to listen without absorbing, to speak without seeking validation, to love without losing yourself. This is the balance many philosophers aimed for, not total isolation but selective presence. A conscious withdrawal not from humanity but from noise, the distractions, dramas, and demands that cloud the clarity of being. Each of these thinkers, Nietzsche, Voltaire, the Buddha, the Stoics, echoes Schopenhauer's central truth, that the pursuit of truth often requires a turning inward, not as a rejection of life, but as an affirmation of a deeper kind of life, one not defined by applause, but by awareness. And so, if you've ever felt more alive in silence than in conversation, more connected in solitude than in company, know this: you're in the presence of a tradition that stretches across continents and millennia. You're not escaping the world, you're meeting it at its source. The paradox of freedom, when solitude becomes both a gift and a burden. Solitude is freedom, but solitude is also a burden. This is the paradox that sits at the heart of Schopenhauer's philosophy, and in many ways, at the heart of every brilliant mind that dares to step away from the noise of the crowd. It is the space where truth is most clearly seen, and yet also the space where the soul can ache the deepest. Schopenhauer never romanticized isolation. He didn't pretend that being alone was always peaceful or joyful. He acknowledged the cost emotionally, psychologically, spiritually. In fact, he wrote candidly about how many of the greatest thinkers and creators in history suffered under the very solitude that made their genius possible. Because there is a kind of loneliness that doesn't come from the absence of people, but from the absence of understanding. You can be surrounded by 1,000 faces and still feel like a stranger. You can speak and never be heard. You can reach out and never truly connect. This is not a failure of communication. It is the inevitable pain of seeing the world differently than those around you. For Schopenhauer, this was not something to be pitied. It was something to be accepted, like gravity, like death, like the nature of reality itself. The more clearly you see, the more alone you become. Not because people reject you, but because they simply cannot follow where your mind is going. And so, many of the world's most brilliant individuals become wanderers of the mind, moving through life with a quiet ache. They see patterns others ignore. They feel contradictions others dismiss. They search for truth in a world satisfied with comfort. This isn't arrogance, it's isolation born of clarity. But clarity, without communion, can quickly turn cold. There's a danger in solitude, a shadow. Stay in it too long, and the silence begins to echo. The mind, once free to roam, starts to loop. Reflection becomes rumination, insight becomes sorrow, and the very thing that once set you apart now feels like a prison of your own brilliance. Schopenhauer knew this well. Despite his intellectual rigor, he suffered deeply. Depression, alienation, bitterness. He wrote of life as suffering and the human condition, as one of endless striving without satisfaction. For all his genius, he could not escape the weight of his own awareness. This is the price. When you refuse to play the social game, when you stop participating in the theater of conformity, you gain sovereignty, but you also lose a kind of ease, the easy connection, the casual belonging, the comfort of shared illusion. And yet, what is the alternative? To lie to yourself? To pretend the trivial is meaningful? To force laughter at jokes that bore your soul? For the thinking mind, this is an even greater pain. So instead, we carry the paradox. We carry the weight of knowing what others don't, of feeling deeply what others numb, of being awake in a world that often chooses sleep. But here's the truth that Schopenhauer hinted at, even if he rarely said it outright. You are not alone in your loneliness. You belong to a lineage of thinkers, seekers, creators, rebels. From Nietzsche pacing mountain paths to Dickinson staring through her bedroom window. From Tesla's electric visions in solitude to Marcus Aurelius whispering wisdom to himself in the dead of night, they all walked this road, they all bore this silence. And if you are walking it too, perhaps not by choice but by nature, then let this be your reminder. Your solitude is not a flaw, it is not a punishment. It is the echo of your vision, the very proof that you are seeing what others cannot. You are not lonely because you're broken. You are lonely because you are awake. And while that awakening can hurt, it also liberates. It peels back the masks. It invites you to build a life not of imitation, but of integrity. A life where connection, when it happens, is real. Where silence is respected. Where you no longer shrink yourself to be understood, but expand into your fullest form, even if few can follow. Because in the end, solitude may sting, but the loss of self stings far worse. If you've always felt like you don't belong, maybe it's because you were never meant to. Maybe the reason you've always felt like an outsider isn't because there's something wrong with you. Maybe you don't fit the mold because you were born to break it. We live in a world that idolizes connection, visibility, and constant interaction. The louder, the better. The more followers, the more worth. But what if your silence is not absence, but depth? What if your distance is not rejection, but discernment? If you've always felt like you don't belong, maybe it's because you were never meant to. Maybe you were meant to see the world, not just fit into it. To observe, to question, to peel back the curtain and confront what most people never dare to look at. And for that, solitude is not your punishment. It is your tool. Don't fear being alone. Learn to live with it. More than that, learn to cultivate it. Because solitude, when embraced with awareness, becomes fertile soil. It becomes the ground in which clarity grows, where creativity blooms, and where truth finally has room to speak. It is the mirror in which you can finally meet yourself unfiltered, unmasked, undisturbed. The crowd will never show you who you are. It will only show you who you're expected to be. But in solitude, you get to choose. You get to rebuild yourself from the inside out, based not on applause, but on alignment, not on validation, but on vision. You get to shed the layers of performance and discover the raw, powerful core of who you truly are. This is not easy. It is not comfortable, but it is sacred. You will feel misunderstood. You will crave connection. You may even wonder if something is wrong with you. But I urge you, don't run from that silence. Don't numb it. Don't drown it in distractions. Sit with it. Listen to it. Let it teach you. Because within that discomfort is something most people spend their whole lives avoiding: awakening. Awakening doesn't happen in the spotlight. It doesn't happen at parties or meetings or in endless conversations. Awakening begins in the dark, in the quiet, in the places where no one is watching and you're forced to watch yourself. This is where transformation begins. Schopenhauer knew it. Nietzsche knew it. The Buddha, the Stoics, Dickinson, Tesla, Newton, they all knew it. And now, perhaps, so do you. So if the world feels too loud, too shallow, too artificial, step back. If your soul aches for silence, give it what it asks for. If you find no joy in the games others seem to love, stop playing. You don't have to explain yourself. You don't have to apologize for your depth. You don't need permission to walk your own path. The truth is, most people are too busy trying to belong to ever truly become. But not you. You're not here to blend in. You're here to wake up. So let your solitude be a sanctuary, not a sentence. Let your quiet be strength, not shame. Let your separation be sacred, not because you're above others, but because you've chosen truth over comfort. And when the silence feels heavy, remember, you are not alone in your aloneness. You stand among giants, invisible, maybe, but real, and they're walking right beside you. You don't belong to the crowd. You belong to something deeper, something older, something eternal. So tend to your solitude like a garden. Nourish it with books, with thought, with stillness. Let it protect your spirit from the noise. Let it give birth to a life that is yours completely. Because in the end, the greatest wisdom is not found in conversation, but in contemplation. And the deepest truths are whispered, not shouted. So if you've been waiting for a sign, this is it. Go where the silence lives. It's been waiting for you all along. If this video spoke to something deep within you, if it reminded you that your solitude might be sacred, not strange, then consider subscribing to this channel. Here, we don't chase trends, we explore truth. Together, leave a comment and share. What insight from today's journey resonated with you most? What part of Schopenhauer's vision or the reflections of Nietzsche, Voltaire, or the Buddha did you feel in your own life? And if you believe there's wisdom in walking alone, then like this video so it can reach someone else who may be searching in silence just like you. This is more than a channel. It's a quiet rebellion. Welcome to it.